Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. Acting Homeland Security Secretary Kevin McAleenan is stepping down. The president tweeted the announcement Friday evening. Mr. Trump says McAleenan has done a, quote, outstanding job in the role and highlighted border crossings going down while he held the position. The president says McAleenan plans to spend more time with his family. McAleenan assumed the post this April after Kirstjen Nielsen announced her departure. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News Chief Justice and Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues. He joins me now by the phone. Jeff, thank you so much for being with us. What more can you tell us about the circumstances surrounding his departure?
Well, CBS News sources had been telling us for some time that McAleenan had been considering resigning for several weeks now, and he just finally went to the White House today with his resignation letter in hand. Sources tell us that he spoke to Jared Kushner and Stephen Miller, the president's advisors, but did not get to speak to the president himself before Mr. Trump boarded that plane and headed for Louisiana. Sources tell us, Tanya, that McAleenan believed that he was losing control over the tone and the message coming from DHS, especially as Mark Morgan, who was the acting head of Customs and Border Protection, and then Ken Cuccinelli, who was the acting head of USCIS, were making these television appearances, seemingly trying to jockey for the attention of President Trump. And so it became increasingly clear, according to our sources who were close to McAleenan, that he felt he was sort of losing control of the tone and the message that was coming out of DHS. And so that's what led to his, in part, what led to his resignation.
And he was never even the full Secretary of Homeland Security. He was always just the acting secretary. Was there any frustration, do your sources tell you, with his with that part of his position, that it never was confirmed?
Well, that may have been part of it, but if you look throughout the Trump administration, there are actings all over the place. And in fact, within DHS, there was the acting CBP commissioner as well as the acting head of USCIS. And so it did create some issues for McAleenan on the inside, feeling like there were too many voices on the inside of the agency, on the inside of DHS, trying to undermine his leadership. He'd been on the job for about 6 months before he resigned today, but with that acting title, you just don't have the absolute control over the department. And then you have all these different voices trying to get the president's attention. So that was clearly a source of strain for McAleenan and perhaps, at least according to our sources, led to his decision to step aside.
And do we know how his relationship was with the president? I mean, clearly the president tweeted favorable things about him tonight, but on the inside, was their relationship good?
No, it seemed like he had a good relationship with the president. I mean, if you look at his record over the last 6 months, he became closely aligned with some of the Trump administration's most controversial immigration policies, zero tolerance, which, of course, separated children from their parents at the border. Also, he was building the wall and making it harder for immigrants to seek asylum in the U.S. So, if you look at his record over the last 6 months, he really got a lot accomplished. And so you could see from the tweet tonight, the president appreciated his service and said so many good things about him in that tweet, where we're used to the president not necessarily being complimentary of people who are on the way out. But in this case, he seemed to be very complimentary of McAleenan. They appeared to have a good relationship.
So you have no specific information on how it went down. The president didn't try to convince him to stay then?
Well, he didn't even get to talk to the president today. According to our sources, he went to the White House with his resignation letter in hand. He spoke to Jared Kushner, we're told. He spoke to Stephen Miller, who has led the immigration policy in the White House. But he did not get to speak to the president. So that's what our sources are telling us. That's how they say it went down today.
All right. Well, Jeff Pegues, thank you so much for your insight on all of this. And for more, we're going to bring in now CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez. He joins me now on the phone as well. Camilo, you have been covering the Department of Homeland Security for some time now. What else do you know about McAleenan's resignation?
Yeah, what we know about his tenure is, as Jeff discussed, he came in April at the height of the migrant surge of families from Central America heading towards the U.S.-Mexico border. Apprehensions in May, for example, reached a 13-year monthly high. Since June, however, monthly apprehensions have dropped sharply, and they reached about 50,000 in September. So he's arguably led the U.S. out of the border crisis, but he nevertheless always faced criticism from both immigrant advocates and immigration hardliners who did not see him sufficiently loyal to President Trump. For example, the acting USCIS director, Ken Cuccinelli, has, kept a higher profile. You'll see him on TV always defending the president, using more inflammatory language on immigration. McAleenan never did that. He focused much of his tenure on keeping a low profile, engaging with countries in Latin America to sign what were controversial asylum agreements, but that were agreements nonetheless, in comparison to people like Ken Cuccinelli at USCIS or Mark Morgan at Customs and Border Protection. But like I mentioned earlier, Tanya, he did face criticism from advocates as well, right? We have to remember that before getting this job, he was the head of Customs and Border Protection and oversaw the officers who separated thousands of families from their parents last year.
Right. That was a big controversial move for sure. So, Camilo, should we expect to see any changes in policy at the border with McAleenan stepping down?
A lot of people can disagree with the type of leadership that he exerted at DHS. But it's really difficult to say that his policies did not work because, as I mentioned earlier, his apprehensions along the border have sharply dropped. So I think you will start to see a continuation of those policies, including the one that has forced tens of thousands of asylum seekers to wait in Mexico as a deterrence policy. But I think what you will see a change in is the type of rhetoric from the new acting or whoever is going to be nominated for the secretary position. In recent months, Ken Cuccinelli has emerged as the de facto spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security, even though he only oversees one agency within it.
So is he the leading contender, do you think, Camilo?
I think he is a contender. I think it is still too early to know if he will be tapped for the position. What I will say is that McAleenan was on the job on an active basis for more than half a year, and he was not formally nominated by the president, despite, Tanya, of indications that he enjoyed enough bipartisan support to be confirmed in the Senate. Now, Cuccinelli, because he's more controversial, will have a harder time to be nominated in the Senate, especially getting those Democratic votes that are needed.
So interesting. So, Camilo, why do you think we're seeing such a high turnover rate in leadership at the Department of Homeland Security?
Well, I think it's because of the president's immigration agenda. I think it's important to underscore, Tanya, that the Department of Homeland Security has very important responsibilities that are not related to immigration as well, right? It has a unit to target weapons of mass destruction. It has the United States Coast Guard. It has FEMA, so disaster response responsibilities. But under this administration, hardliners like White House Senior Advisor Stephen Miller and others have tried to use the agency as a way to push for a very hardline immigration agenda. So I think that's why you get a lot of pushback from people like McAleenan, who are career law enforcement officers who have tried to conduct themselves in a more neutral approach and also take care of the other responsibilities that the department has, in addition to those immigration-related ones.
Yeah, trying to stay in a neutral lane doesn't always work so well with this president.
No.
All right. Well, Camilo Montoya-Galvez, we thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya.